Hello everyone, Andrew here, and welcome back to my series where we're going to be ranking every single NES game in alphabetical order. Last month we started with the numerical games, of which there was like 6 of, so it wasn't too big of a task to take on. But this month we have 35 games to get through, so without further ado, we're going to be jumping right in. If you haven't watched the previous part, definitely recommend checking that out where I go over a lot more of the details and such of the series. But one thing that's important to note is that all of the games we're ranking today are games I have played all of the way through without save states, walkthroughs, cheats, and on original Nintendo hardware. I only point that out because just so that you understand where I'm coming from when I rank the game. Someone who's only played the games for 10 minutes and feels that they have a grasp of it's gonna rank things a little differently probably than someone who's actually, played it all the way through. Although, as I always say, whatever way you enjoy playing retro games is the best way to play them. So whether you're doing it, the old-fashioned way or with save states and more modern conveniences, whatever way you enjoy, that is the way you should play it. But without, again, further ado, let's jump in with A Boy and His Blob. I talked a little bit about this game on my channel in the past. You feed the blob different flavored jelly beans to get him to do different things, and it's a little easier once you realize that the names of each of the jelly beans actually relate to what the blob will end up doing when you feed it to him. The punch jelly bean creates a hole in the floor that you can fall through. The cola jelly bean produces a bubble you can float in. The cinnamon jelly bean makes like a flamethrower you can use to burn some objects. So that's a big hurdle right there, is just remembering what bean does what. But otherwise, you're exploring kind of like this, open world cave where you have to find as much treasure as you can, take that down to the store, trade it in for some items which you'll then use to tackle the final area of the game. It's overall not very long, and I was actually kind of shocked when I beat it. I was like, oh, that was kind of it. So, it's interesting in that regard. And also, there's some physics things that are kind of weird, like the whole game plays like you're on ice for some reason. If you try to stop moving, suddenly he slides for like 5 minutes. It's crazy. So there's definitely some room for improvement in The Boy and His Blob, and I think it actually got like a reboot on the Switch, and I haven't checked that one out. Sorry, not the Switch, on the Wii. I need to play that at some point, but in terms of the original NES release, it's very average, but if you check it out, you'll probably get some fun out of it. And as a result of that, I think it will be our first game in the C category. Again, reiterated from the last part, anything like C and up is a good game. You should play it. This isn't like, the game review sites kind of system where if it doesn't get 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, it's, not worth your time sort of thing. Even games in the C category are still definitely worth a play. But once you get to D and E, that's kind of like the section where, you don't really need to, take your times to touch these games. But otherwise, The Boy and His Blob, first entry with the C's. Next, we have A Nightmare on Elm Street. I need to make sure I don't go too long with the reviews. If we're going to be doing 35 games, I don't want to take up your whole day here. But this game gets, I think, a bad rap a little bit because it's one of the first horror-style games that the Angry Video Game Nerd reviewed, and people always associated it with, oh, it's not a good game because he did that. Did you know that this game is actually made by Rare? The same Rare that would make Battletoads and eventually Donkey Kong Country and Banjo-Kazooie, and that also the music was composed by David Wise of Donkey Kong Country fame? Like, how can you not love this game? It's awesome. Plus, it has 4-player simultaneous play, like how many years before New Super Mario Bros. Wii did it, so, It's actually pretty fascinating. I like it. I thought it was pretty fun. It has some quirks to it, which of course, if those had been worked out, it would have been a little bit better, but still, I thought it was cool. You collect the bones. I hear that, I think it's from like the third A Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I haven't seen them all. For whatever reason, horror movies seem to spawn like a bajillion sequels. But still, just the core game itself, a lot of fun, and, it's made by Rare, and it's neat to see where they came from over time. So, for the innovative things it does, like the 4-player play, to just overall being pretty good, and it has an awesome soundtrack, I think it deserves to be in the B's. Abadox is a scrolling shooter where you fly inside this, living organism planet to destroy it from within. Pretty interesting story. I think it actually had to be toned down a little bit in the West because there's some pretty graphic stuff in there in the Japanese release. I believe, anyway. I could be thinking of another game, but it seems appropriate for this one. But otherwise, it's your pretty typical scrolling shooter, with the exception that there are some portions that actually scroll from top to bottom, where if you've ever played a shooter before, you're probably more used to it going from bottom to top. And it's also one of those games where just touching the sides of the wall instantly destroys you. So, you know, Silver Surfer vibes there and such. I definitely prefer more like the 1943 style we talked about last time, where you get this big open area, and the obstacles you're dealing with are really the enemies themselves, where Abadox, the biggest thing you're going to be fighting is the walls, and not running into them and getting destroyed in that way. But otherwise, really fun game, actually made by Natsume, despite the fact it was published by Milton Bradley. You wouldn't know that. So, you know, Natsume of Harvest Moon and of Pocky and Rocky fame. Cool game, really like it quite a bit, and it's going to get a B from me. So remember, we're doing the unlicensed games too, which means we unfortunately have to talk about this abomination. Action 52, one of the worst games on the Nintendo Entertainment System. You would think with 52 games in there, one of them would be somewhat decent, and yet they're all pretty trash. Again, you know, I haven't technically beat Action 52. I played each of the games and played them to the extent that I thought I could. A lot of them are unbeatable, they just crash. You know, they're not programmed correctly, you just can't do it. I think I kept a list, and I think I beat 11 out of the 52 games. When I say beat, you know, that just means getting to a point where maybe they loop back around to the first level again or something. I think we're gonna have to, you know, pop this one in at some point and play some more Action 52, probably on a stream. But otherwise, just awful, 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 awful. It gets our first E of the series. The Addams Family is our introductions to games made by Ocean Software, and that's a name you should run from when you hear people dislike LJN and such. Ocean has a way with games that will blow your mind. They're typically pretty nice visually, pretty nice audibly, not so great when it comes to control, and pretty evil when it comes to level design. I don't know how many Ocean games have a situation where you'll just die undeservedly. Like, take example in Addams Family. There's one point when there's just 4 doors, 3 of which you need to enter to progress the game, collect items that you need, and a 4th one which just leads to an instant death pit of spikes that you had no way to prepare for. And it's like, it's not like that ever means anything. It's just, haha, you picked the wrong door, now you're dead. And, you know, die enough times, you gotta start the game over from the beginning. So it was just a really cheap way to, you know, kill you and make you start again from the beginning to extend their game. And like, Cool World has this, Darkman has a system like this, just Ocean, that was just a mean thing that they did. So otherwise, it's not a bad game. Play as Gomez trying to rescue the members of Addams Family, and it's not bad, but again, that Ocean quirkiness unfortunately adds just a little bit of a stench to it, which stops it from being a B rank, I believe. Still worth the play, but just be prepared for jank, as you will want to be prepared for in any game made by Ocean. Alright, it's Adventure Island time! So, the Adventure Island series, quite prominent on the NES, a little bit on the Super NES, and then it just kind of disappeared from existence. The original Adventure Island was actually an adaptation of the game Wonder Boy, the arcade game Wonder Boy, for the NES. And it's just a side-scrolling game where you get axes, throw them at enemies, and run through 32 very similar feeling levels. That's the problem with Adventure Island 1, is it kind of just feels like you're playing the same game over and over again, and the levels don't have all that much variety to them. It's a pretty simple game until you get halfway through to World 5, when the difficulty picks up a bit, and then by the time you get to World 8, it becomes almost outright unfair. Yeah, you get hardly any weapons to deal with, pretty much everything kills you in one hit. And I think I spent as much time on World 8 as I spent on the rest of the game combined, just trying to beat the levels there. So unfortunately, it became more of a, you know, unfun, frustrating kind of slog than it should have just been a fun romp through the game that you actually get the impression that it's going to be when you play those first few levels. You wouldn't imagine it getting as brutal as it does by the end. And just again, it's a very so-so game, very repetitive, not the most memorable. Almost makes me want to put it in the D category, but you can still get some fun out of it. Just be prepared for, you know, a long, hard, drawn-out fight getting through that final world at the end, but otherwise, it's going to be put in the C's. So that brings us to Adventure Island 2. Now, how does this compare to the original game? And it is much, much better. Which again makes me think maybe the original Adventure Island 1 should be in the D, just because This is by leaps and bounds a far better game. Not just a, copy paste of an arcade game with a new character slapped onto the NES. No, this is a completely original game, and it actually came out 2 years after Super Mario Bros. 3, and man, can you see some Mario 3 influences in this game, which is of course never a bad thing. Who doesn't want their game to be more like Super Mario Bros. 3? There's literally this, item area that you go to sometimes, a secret area where this dragon gives you an item. It looks like a complete rip-off of Toad Houses from Mario 3. Also, you get an item reserve where you can select different things to use before entering a level, and there's even dinosaurs that you can ride. So Miyamoto saying you couldn't program Yoshi on the NES, you're full of it. Hudson Soft did it. No, I'm assuming he meant back in like 1985 it couldn't be done. It's amazing that, NES games just progressed so incredibly from, what was released back in the early days of like the Famicom NES to what they were able to do by the time you get around to the 90s. But Adventure Island 2, a lot more fun, a lot more levels, a lot more variety in the levels, and just overall a much more enjoyable game. So, if you're ever going to play Adventure Island games, I won't blame you if you you skip the first one, you just try it out for a little bit, but 2 is where the series really takes off, and it definitely deserves a B. And that brings us to Adventure Island 3, so kind of the, final one in the series of NES games, but if in Japan, I think Adventure Island 4 was actually the final Famicom game ever released over there, but it unfortunately never got a localization here. But in terms of what we got, Adventure Island 3 is just the best of everything, and that's what a sequel should do, right? Adventure Island 2 takes what they did right in Adventure Island 1 and builds on top of it. Adventure Island 3, again, looks at what was in Adventure Island 2 and just makes a better game and just a more fun experience overall. So I loved Adventure Island 3. It's so cool. It's pretty much the same story, kind of, again, except this time aliens attack, because, you gotta get aliens in there somehow. Again, more items to choose from, more dinosaurs, more things in the reserve, more level themes. I just had such a good time with Adventure Island 3, and again, it just does the best of everything that the Adventure Island series had done at this point. And if you're gonna play any of them, for some reason, you're not gonna start at the beginning of the series, you just want to play one of them, Adventure Island 3 is definitely the one to go with. And in terms of the plastic case, I just put those on some games that have particularly nice cover labels. You don't want those getting marked up, especially with what we're doing here. But don't worry, I take it out of the plastic and play my games all the time. I had that question once where I have glass cases and such for my games. Someone's like, well, that's no fun if they're just back there and they never get played. Don't worry, I play my games. You can count on that. But otherwise, first A game of the day. Let's move on to the next one. Adventures in the Magic Kingdom. So this game should be right down my alley. I love theme parks. I've been to Disneyland, Disney World, Universal Studios, and this NES game just tries to take that experience of visiting Disneyland and turn it into an NES game. And how does that go? Unfortunately, not that well. It's a Capcom Disney game. You think it would be great, and yet it just kind of fails in so many different ways. The story is that there's this castle you need to get into, and there's 6 keys that you need to do it. So in order to find those keys, you need to get through 5 different attractions, and there's also like 1 quiz that you do to get one of the keys. You gotta go around the park and answer a whole bunch of like random Disney related questions, and this was personally one of my favorite parts of the game, because I enjoy trivia and just random stuff like that. But in terms of the actual levels and gameplay, there's some platforming sections which don't really feel that great. I don't know, I wasn't a huge fan of how they controlled, and the levels weren't that great. And then there's like a racing game which feels very so-so. There's like a DDR reactionary Dragon's Lair style thing where you're just kind of flying through space, and whatever directional or button appears on the bottom of the screen, you press that fast enough to get to the end. And then there's like a train one. Reminds me of a mini game from Mario Party 3 where you're just picking which track to go down and praying that it doesn't have any obstacles in the way. I don't know, it just misses for me, and it's a shame because I feel like the game has a lot of potential, but instead it just ends up being this weird, strange thing. I guess maybe it was intended to be like an advertisement for the Magic Kingdom for Disneyland, but again, it falls flat in my mind in that regard. So unfortunately, Capcom, you did dirty on this one, and I don't have any rush to go back and play Magic Kingdom, Adventures in the Magic Kingdom, so it gets our first D for Disney. But let's wash that taste out of our mouth with some Adventures of Bayou Billy. Okay, if you've watched any of my videos before this one, you probably know how I feel about this game, and it freaking is awesome. I love the Adventures of Bayou Billy. It's a Konami game, and it takes 3 of the most prominent arcade genres of the time and combines them into one. beat 'em up, light gun, driving. Oh, and it does all of them so well. I absolutely love it. And I've talked before I started my challenge of trying to beat every single NES game that was released in North America, I played this game years ago and got my butt absolutely handed to me in like the first 30 seconds. It's a brutal game. But part of what just keeps me thinking about it, remembering how much fun I had playing it, is just how awesome it felt to overcome that challenge. And that is such an important thing for me, is not just the game itself, not just the story that takes place in the game, but the story of you, the player, and what you had to overcome to eventually get to the ending and beat it. And that was what I experienced when I played The Adventures of Bayou Billy. Man, was it fun. The beat 'em up stages were great once you get used to them. The driving feels great. The light gun feels great. And even if you don't have a light gun, there's also a mode where you can just use a cursor instead. If you select Game B on the title screen, that's what it kind of does. Game A is the light gun, and then Game B, you just kind of use a cursor for the light gun stages to move around instead. Not as great. Definitely recommend playing it with the light gun if you can. But still, wow, was The Adventures of Bayou Billy fun. Just overall, great gameplay, great music throughout, and just, you know, it's just a great story. It's just overall, I have nothing to complain about in terms of it. You know, it's really difficult, but to me, I love that sort of thing. Just wow, what a game. And you know, it pains me to do this because the whole thing about this rating system is, you know, it's Sonic Adventure 2. When I played Sonic Heroes and I found out there was a rank S, I was like, no, all you need is, you know, A through E. Adventure 2 did it so well, but Bayou Billy is on such another level to me. I think we gotta bring out the big guns in this case. Bring out a little bit of an extra powwow here for The Adventures of Bayou Billy. I'm gonna have to fix all this stuff, but here it is in all its glory. The rank S. This is going to be very rare in our rankings. Don't expect this, you know, to be like 5 rank S games every month. Don't even expect 1 per month. That's how rare it's going to be. But the games that just really blew my mind, that really left an impression on me that I still look back to today and think, wow, that was a phenomenal game. Those are going into the S category. And yeah, Bayou Billy is our first one. But with that, let's move on. Yeah, so we have a game in each of the categories now. Again, if you like any of those 3 genres that I mentioned in The Adventures of Bayou Billy, it's such a cool game. It's going to take some time to get used to. Again, it's pretty tough. But again, if you can push past that, and especially if you can play it without the cheats and save states and such, it is just so fun, and I highly recommend it. Such a phenomenal game. But alright, moving on then, we get The Adventures of Dino Ricky. Now this game gets a bad rap. This is one where if you look it up, you're probably going to find a lot of negative opinions of it. It's essentially a shoot 'em up, but not one where you're flying a plane. No, it's just a guy who can never stop walking. He's always walking forward. And those are the funniest to me, you know, shoot 'em ups like that. Like, I can get it if you're in a plane, you can't exactly just stop, you know, on a dime. But, you know, ones like this and like Gunsmoke, no, that's that guy, once he starts moving, he doesn't stop till the sun goes down. And the Adventures of Dino Ricky is like that, except it also, I think, it combines a platforming element, which I believe is why people kind of get frustrated with this game. Overall, the shoot 'em up style is very nice. Just enemies come at you, you shoot them, you pick up power-ups. Unfortunately, these power-ups also work as like an obstacle of sorts where you can't shoot through them, which is kind of flawed. But the biggest thing about this game is that you sometimes have to jump over gaps onto lily pads, and it's like super precise. And the fact that you just never stop walking makes this really hard to pull off. You'll just land on a lily pad and then whoops, he walked right into the water. So there's a quirkiness to it, absolutely, but I still had fun with it. I like my shoot 'em ups. I thought it was pretty fun. And while it kinda hangs over the D category a little bit, I think it's just good enough to deserve a C. There's just enough in there that I like, you know, to not push it below the threshold of I think you should try this game. Again, some people are probably not going to be as generous as me, but again, as someone who's beat it, it's not even that long of a game. It's like 4 levels long. I thought it was pretty fun. But with that, next game. It's the Adventures of Lolo time! So I love a good puzzle game, and the Adventures of Lolo series really does it well. The original game is just 50 levels. What happens is you get one single room where you can see everything that's going on at once. I like that. Sometimes puzzle games, it's like, you know, it's this massive room, you can't even see it all on screen at once, but no, Lolo keeps it nice and compact. You gotta collect all of the heart framers, and when doing so, a chest will open with a jewel inside it. Collect that jewel, and the door to the next room will open. Do that 50 times and you have beat the original Adventures of Lolo, a very simple game compared to its sequels. Wow. Now the second one essentially picks up in difficulty almost where the first one left off. It's a very good introduction to the series. So if you have not played many puzzle games, you just kind of want like a nice slow introduction, nothing that's gonna break your brain too hard, the original is very good for that. But, you know, it's definitely a little bit inferior to its sequels, where Adventures of Lolo 2, again 50 levels, but this time the difficulty of the puzzles ramped up quite a bit, and just overall, I think it makes the game more memorable in that sense. I'm never a fan of the games where you just kind of sleepwalk through them. You know, as you can probably figure out from how I talked about the Adventures of Bayou Billy, I love that challenge and I love overcoming it, because those are the moments that I look back on, you know, months or even years after I beat a game. And Lolo 2, very good. Again, it has a bit of a graphical update there, bit more of a cutscene story element going on, and just I like the puzzles more in this one, so it gets a bit of a bump up into the B category. But finishing off, another NES trilogy. There is a third Adventures of Lolo game, and whoa, does this one blow the other two out of the water. It's funny, again, just like Adventure Island, if you're gonna play any of them, it has to be the third one. This game incorporates an overworld element where you can actually explore a little and pick the levels that you want to do in the order that you want to do them. And that's great, because say you get stuck on one puzzle, you can kind of take a break from it from a little bit and go on to another one. Just really neat in that regard. The graphics, again, have been updated. I think the music in this game is definitely the best in the series. And there's a lot more going on here as well. And there's even bosses. Sometimes the levels end with boss fights, and that was not something that was really in the first two games. So there's just so much to love about Adventures of Lolo 3. It has way more puzzles than the other ones. And this is another one that, you know, really left an impression on me in the end. So it certainly gets an A. And I noticed what we did there. You're probably saying, Andrew, you're so predictable. Adventure Island series was CBA, Lolo CBA, and that's what a good series should do. A good series should have a good base as its entry game, and then the second game, or the sequel, should, you know, build upon that, take what was good, make it better, take the things that didn't work out, replace them with good things, and then that's how a series should go. You never want your series to go like BCA, or like ABC, or something like that. So what this shows is that the Adventures of Lolo and the Adventure Island series did what any series should do, and gradually get better as it goes on, and I stand by that. If you're gonna play one game from each of those series, it has to be the third ones, because they are just the best. And now to dampen the mood a little bit with the Adventures of Tom Sawyer. I didn't care for this game. Maybe if you're like a huge Tom Sawyer fan, reading it every night before you go to bed, you're gonna be like, wow, this game's amazing. It's about a kid who, I guess, like dreams that he's Tom Sawyer in class. It's very bizarre. There's nothing memorable about this game. It's actually, the one thing I always remember about this game is that the main character, I guess Tom Sawyer, usually in a video game, if you could throw a projectile, you're limited to like 2 on screen at a time. This guy can just throw rocks all day long and there is no limit. I think that's kind of funny, but otherwise the levels are kind of like, the gameplay's like, it's just very, very there. And sometimes it even turns into like a shoot 'em up when you're going down the river, but even that's kind of like, there's other games that do all these things better. And what's weird is that the Japanese version, the levels are in a completely different order. Like the first level in the North American version is like the 6th level in the Japanese version. And that's why there's guys in the North American version level 1 who have guns but never shoot, because they took out the shooting. Since it's, you know, it's only the first level, it can't be too difficult. Meanwhile, in the Japanese version, they're shooting at you because that's obviously later in the game. So that just goes to tell you how much of a nothing burger this game is if they can literally flip around the positions of levels and it changes nothing. It's just, you know, going through the paces. It's not a game I ever have any desire to go back and play again, so it goes into the D category. Again, maybe you'll get some enjoyment out of it, but for me, there's much better on the NES, I believe. So here we have our first Tengen game. Afterburner, based on the Sega arcade game. Of course, it was also released on like the Master System and on the Genesis, but for some reason, Tengen, Atari's company, decided to bring Afterburner to the NES, and it's very choppy, very so-so, but Afterburner was always kind of like that a little bit. It's a very tough game. It's like 23 levels, and you start with 3 lives. You'll earn a few extra along the way, but otherwise there are no continues. I spent a whole week getting from beginning to end of this game without getting a game over. And one of those days was even Christmas. I remember it's like, yeah, I got Metroid Dread. All right, time to go play some more Afterburner. It's like, I was really into it. I actually had a lot of fun trying to beat it, but there's a big learning curve to it for sure. It's unfortunately not like a Star Fox or something where, you know, it's very fluid. You can always tell where you should be positioned to dodge stuff that's coming at you. Afterburner, it's a lot more up in the air. Again, you really need to figure out the inner workings of the game in order to get good at this, and even then, man, by the end, is it brutal. You'll get to the end so many times, game over, have to start again from the beginning, but again, just like Bayou Billy, it felt really good to overcome that, and I have fairly fond memories of it at this point. So, for that reason, it goes into the sea. You should try it. You might not play through the whole thing, but I think it's a cool experience. And it was also like the first third-person NES shooter, flying shooter that I had beat. So there was definitely, a good experience there learning how to do that would help me later on as I played other games of similar type. But with that, moving on. Next up is Air Fortress, made by HAL Laboratories and actually worked on by Satoru Iwata, who you likely know. Very cool game. There's 8 air fortresses that you have to clear, and each one consists of 2 different components. The first is a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up section where you can collect power-ups, which then transfer over into the indoors exploration where you need to find the reactor of the air fortress and then escape before it blows up with you inside. Do that 8 times and you've blown up all of them. It's a really neat game, really fun. Again, though, the shoot 'em up section follows like the can't touch the walls or you're instantly dead style of gameplay, which it's pretty nerve-wracking. But overall, very cool game. Definitely one I recommend checking out, even though it's not one you hear too often, unfortunately. And it gets a good old B ranking in my book. So we talked about Afterburner and how that got me kind of adjusted to the third-person shooter style of gameplay on the NES. Well, Airwolf is a first-person helicopter flight simulator based on a television show, apparently, also called Airwolf. And you can tell that because the title screen music is an 8-bit rendition of the title music from the Airwolf show, but get ready because that is literally the only song that plays the entire game. So it's one of those where they had enough music, enough money for one soundtrack, and that was the track they went with. But this game is brutal. It's just overall, it's a pretty janky game to begin with, and the fact you have to get through 20 levels without game overing, otherwise you get sent all the way back to the beginning. It's a slog. It's quite difficult. And also it's very slow too, because in between each stage it does like this, typewriter sort of thing where it prints out your score and such, and you can't skip that. So not only is it like you have to replay all the way to the point that you game over that, you also have to sit through like 15 minutes worth of, your score being displayed. Ugh. This one took me like 4 or 5 days to beat it. There was a part of me who wondered if I would ever get to the end of it, but when you did, and that's it, it doesn't even end too, it just starts like looping around again. You hardly get any kind of congratulations for actually doing it. But if you can beat all 20 levels, wow, you never have to play Airwolf again. But in my mind, it's certainly what I don't want to play again, so it goes straight to the D category. However, I do appreciate it again for the fact that I feel I am better at those first-person flight simulators than I was before I played Airwolf. It kind of prepared me for the ones that would come later, because for whatever reason, the NES has quite a few of them. But with that, moving on. Unser Turbo Racing. What makes it so turbo, you might ask? Well, it's actually a pretty cool third-person racing game for the NES. And when you hold up on the control pad when you're going max speed, because A is the normal accelerate button, but when you hold up, you get like a turbo boost from behind that will last as long as you have turbo left in reserve. And yeah, that's just basically what it is. It's a pretty basic Formula 1 styled racing game with a turbo functionality added in, and you can play through the pretty much the season, trying to have the most points by the end, and if you do, then you win. And it also has save backup. Anytime you see that gold sticker on the back of an NES cartridge, it means that it saves, unlike, of course, the ones that have the gray cartridges. That gold instantly tells you this game has battery backup, so it saves your progress and stuff, which is nice. It also means that if you do really poorly in a race and don't get any points, you just like reset and try the race again. Totally not something that I did. But otherwise, yeah, if you're looking for a decent third person racing game on the NES, Turbo Racing, not too bad. So it gets a solid C. Alfred Chicken is a weird one. It's a later NES release, pretty obscure at this point. It's apparently based on a Game Boy game. Like, the Game Boy game came out first, and then they made an NES game about it, which is a really weird way to do it. Usually you would think about it going the other way. Unfortunately, I wasn't a huge fan. The way that the movement works, the way that attacking works, you can only hurt enemies if you jump up into the air and then hold down to kind of drill down with your beak at them. But sometimes when you jump, it's like, it takes so long to get into that moment. You'll end up landing on them without doing the beak attack and just take damage. It's a strange one. And then the whole point is you go around the levels, finding all of the balloons, which will allow you to get to the end. And then once you get to the end, you fight a boss. The coolest part of this game is that in each level, there is a secret item hidden that will give you the Super Ball from Mario Land. Like, literally, it bounces off walls, it collects items when it touches it. So it literally ripped off the Super Ball right from Mario Land. And finding that hidden in each stage and using it was my favorite part of this game for sure. But otherwise, it's a very basic platformer. I thought the music was kind of ear grating. Again, another area where it could have been good. Having good music always adds extra points to a game in my book. But even the music for this one, not that great. And I got to the end of level 5, and I was saying, all right, you know what? I'm kind of getting into the groove of this game. I'm kind of digging it. And then that was it. Level 5 was the last level. I hear that apparently the Game Boy game is even longer than the NES game, so I have no idea what they were thinking with this one. Just a weird game all around. But can you have some fun with it? Yes, you probably can. Is it as bad as Airwolf and Disney's Magic Kingdom? No, probably not. So for that reason, I'll give it a C, because you can have some fun with it, and it has the Super Ball from Mario Land in there, which is worth some extra points. But unfortunately, otherwise, not a great game. It's a weird one for sure. So after Alfred Chicken, we get Alien 3. Naturally based on the movie, and it's a side-scrolling run-and-gun game where the point is you have to find all of the trapped people, and then you can proceed to the end in each level. There's 8 levels plus 4 bosses, so basically 2 levels and a boss, 2 levels and a boss. You beat that 4 times and you beat the game. It's not too bad overall. It's probably going to take you a few tries to figure out, because levels have time limits, and the chances of you finding all of the trapped guys and then getting to the end without dying a few times is not likely. You're going to need to replay it a little bit. Figure out the layouts of the level, figure out where people are, and then get to the end. So there's certainly some trial and error with this game. One thing that is unfortunate about this game in particular is that it's, for some reason, has A as the shoot button and B as the jump button. Now, maybe you're thinking, Andrew, it was early on in the video game days. The standards weren't set in stone yet. But then you realize Alien 3 came out in 1992. There is no excuse for a game coming out that late to not understand that B should be shoot and A should be jump. It is just crazy. And then you see that on the title screen, there's actually an options menu. So you think, oh, maybe, just maybe they would have been smart enough to put in the options menu a way to switch between which button is A and B, but unfortunately not. There's other bizarre things, like you can set how many lives you start the game with. So if you want to start with 9 lives, because there's going to be all that trial and error, go for it. But one thing that should be mentioned, since we're talking about the title screen, is that Alien 3 has one of the best title screen themes of any NES game. So unfortunately, it's a rather subpar game. But if you have this cartridge, just pop it in, turn on that title screen, and you can listen to that all day long. It is such a phenomenal thing. It almost makes me want to bump it up a little bit because the title screen music is so good. But then I remember that the B button is jump and the A button is shoot. And it gets booted back down a little bit to the C category. So yeah, Alien 3, again, not horrible, but not great either. So there it goes. So Alien Syndrome now, our second Tengen game. So after Afterburner, it's a weird thing to say. I was prepared for this to be like super hard. Afterburner took me like a week to beat. It was brutally difficult. So I figured, okay, 10 games, obviously they want you to get your bang for your buck, and they are going to be super tough and probably going to take me a whole bunch of time. I beat this game in like a single sitting. It was actually pretty simple. It's just a overhead run and gun shoot 'em up where you, again, you know, it's funny how much it is like Alien 3, where you rescue people, get to the end of the level, and then you fight a boss, do that like 6 or 7 times, and you win. Nothing too memorable though. Again, I kind of sat down, beat it in one sitting, and never really thought about it much again afterwards. But it's a decent game. It's not too bad, and I think, again, you know, it would be wrong to give it anything lower than a C, because it doesn't do anything that, you know, really offends you, but at the same time, it's not like a game you're probably to go back to you know, too often either. So Alien Syndrome gets a C. All Pro Basketball was the first basketball game that I hit on my NES journey here, and man, am I happy that it was, because it was a really fun game. Just overall, it's basketball in its purest form. You even get, like, you know, bench players that you can swap out once your, you know, original players get tired. And you play through a 35 game season. So to beat it, you're going to be taking a long time, unfortunately. Each game, I think, took about 15 minutes, so you can do the math on just how long you're going to be playing this one. I can't remember if it was 15 minutes for a whole game, or if it was 15 minutes for a half, but otherwise, you have to play a lot of games. All for, at the end, it doesn't even say your proper record. I had a 35-0 record, and yet it still showed at the end that I was 34-1 for some reason. So, you know, what a way to end the game. But overall, if you want a basketball game on the NES, this is a good one, and it has a password system. So if you want to do that whole sort of season thing, don't worry, you don't have to do it in one sitting. But yeah, had a lot of fun with All Pro Basketball, and it gets a B. Alpha Mission, the NES port of SNK's space shooter. It's unfortunately very underwhelming. We've talked about Abadox, we've talked about 1943, even like, you know, Air Fortress has that shoot 'em up component to it. Unfortunately, Alpha Mission is just underwhelming in every way. It's slow, it's laggy, it doesn't sound great, doesn't play great, don't have much to say, unfortunately, good about Alpha Mission. And for whatever reason, SNK's early NES games were just like this. They were just janky and not that great to play. I guess, you know, if it was all you had back in the earlier days of the NES, sure, you might get some enjoyment out of Alpha Mission, but there's just so much better out there that there's no real reason to go back and play Alpha Mission today. So it gets a D. Amagon, this game is great, and yet you've probably never heard of it before. You're this military guy who gets sent to this island where, like, strange things are going on with the mission of finding out just what is happening. It's like a run and gun game, you know, it feels like you're Mega Man, almost kind of like Contra, but you can't shoot up, down, into the diagonals. You're just running around with this gun, shooting all the crazy monsters that you run into. And it's just fun, you know, it plays great, it sounds great, but one of the coolest things about this game is that points actually matter. This is one of those games where it's like, you know, you want to accumulate as many points as possible. It's not just an arbitrary number on the screen. For every 8,000 points that you have, when you press the select button, you transform into like this super macho man who can now go around and punch enemies in the face, because otherwise, to this point, taking one hit will destroy you. But for every 8,000 points that you have, when you press select, you get one additional health bar to use while you're this macho man. And it's just so neat. Like, it is just such a bizarre and yet fun game. And if you're a fan of gameplay in things like Mega Man or in Contra, you are going to enjoy Amagon for sure. This is one I cannot recommend enough. It blew me away, you know, as I was not expecting to enjoy it so much, especially with the concept is so weird. This military guy with a gun who turns into a macho guy who punches like lions in the face. Who is not going to love that? So it gets a B from me. You have to try out Amagon if you have not done so. All right, 25 down and 10 to go. We're in the final stretch here, coming up with American Gladiators. Now, this is a game tech game, and previous to this, I had played like Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, so I was like, game tech, wow, this is going to be a walk in the park. Their games are super simple, except not really. American Gladiators, I guess based on the TV show of the same name, you have to play through 5 different events at 4 different difficulty levels, and after each difficulty level is cleared, you get a password so that you can continue and go back to where you left off. And unfortunately, What makes this game difficult at first is that each different event that you partake in has different controls, and none of the controls feel all that great. So you have 5 events now that you need to, for each of them, figure out exactly what you're supposed to do and how to make the game do what you want it to do. And it does not feel great in the beginning, but as you learn how to play, it actually gets pretty fun. And the game ends with the Eliminator, this like final gauntlet that you have to run. And I'll admit that that part was really exciting. When you get to the end of that and you win, man, do you feel like you just overcame this massive challenge. And for that reason, because I look back at it being janky, at it being not the best game at times, it did feel really fun to beat. And I actually did have a decent time with it. So for that reason, it's almost a D, but it will get a C today, where you should try it. If you don't have, again, if you're not willing to put the time into learning how to play each of the events, you probably won't get too far. But I feel like for those who do, there is definitely fun to be had with American Gladiators. So that's why it gets a C from me. Anticipation is another Rareware game. Of course, I don't just want to say rare games. You're going to think I mean like, you know, it's hard to find or something like that. But, you know, they made games like this, and Anticipation's another one. It's a board game that plays a lot like Pictionary. You can be played with up to 4 players, and you go around this board which has 3 different levels, and the point is for the person to guess what picture's on the screen. You get a card from whatever color panel that question came from, then you move around the board until you get a card of each color. Then you move up to the 2nd level, and then the 3rd level, and then whoever gets to the end of that first wins. It's actually a really fun game. It's just funny, you know, the pictures start showing up on the screen, trying to figure out what they are. If you ever have the chance to play Anticipation with another player or with up to 4 players, I highly suggest you do so. And it's one of probably the best party games, and just, you know, multiplayer games on the NES. And it would be a really cool one to have on Nintendo Switch Online. I think that would be a lot of fun. But probably the whole Rare situation, you know, makes that difficult. But if we got GoldenEye, you just never know what we're gonna get. But for that reason, I enjoy Anticipation so much, and it's just so different than pretty much any of the other games we're talking about. It's totally worth a play, especially if you can get like up to 4 people doing it. It gets an A in my book. It's just really, really fun. So check it out if you ever get the chance. Archon is basically chess with a twist. There's 2 sides, the light side and the dark side, and the point is to occupy all of the special spaces on the board or to completely wipe out your opponent. The pieces move pretty much exactly like chess pieces, but the twist is that when 2 pieces cross paths, it's not just like an instant one player wipes out the other. You actually enter a Zelda-styled battle, top-down action battle, where you fight against the other player, and then the winner from that is of course the one who remains victorious, and while the other person gets wiped off the board. This is really neat because it means that even if you're a little outmatched, if you're really good at the game, you might still be able to overcome those difficult players. So like the pawn can, like, you know, wipe out the stronger guys. It's a fascinating system. It's a little bit odd, and it's a game you're probably not going to hear too much about, but I thought it was fun for what it was. No real rush to get back to it, but if you're into chess and you're into Legend of Zelda, this is like a mashup of those 2 things, so you might get a lot of enjoyment out of that, and I think it deserves a solid C, because again, it's not bad, but it's not like amazing in my book either, but cool game nonetheless. Arch Rivals, it's a basketball game where you can beat up the other player, originally based on an arcade game. I wasn't too fond of this one, and again, it's not because I have anything against basketball. Remember, I gave All Pro Basketball a B. Just the whole, like, you know, fighting while you're playing a sport thing. It's been done in video games before. Not my favorite theme, and there's just not much to this game. There's no tournament mode. You just pick 2 teams, 2 characters, and then you kind of go at it. It's basketball with a whole bunch of people punching and beating each other up in between. I thought it was very, very so-so, especially compared to, you know, playing all pro basketball not long before. So it gets a D in my book. Maybe, you know, if you have more experience with the arcade version, you know, you might be more into Arch Rivals. But for me, and from what I experienced from it, not one I need to go back to again anytime soon. So now we have Arkanoid on the NES. Arkanoid likely needs no introduction. You get that paddle at the bottom, the vase, you get the ball bouncing around, and the goal is for you to destroy all of the blocks in each of the levels. Of course, originally an arcade game, this is the NES conversion of it, and there was even a controller released on the NES so that it would feel more traditional to the arcade version, where you just kind of rotate the controller rather than having to use the D-pad. The thing about this game, though, is that it does not give you a single continue. Arkanoid is an arcade game. It was made with the intention of you getting game over and having to put more quarters in. This being a pretty much exact conversion of the arcade game onto the NES, how can you not give the player any continues? That is insane. Only the most trained professional Arkanoid pros could ever play through this entire thing without a single game over. It's crazy. And the fact that they didn't see that as a problem really blows my mind. So this is one case, and I will always be open and note this whenever it is relevant. I did use a code to help me beat this game. There is a continue code. It's not even just like a nice hold A and press start. There's like a whole combination you have to enter, which you can easily get wrong and get sent back to the beginning. But I just don't know what they were thinking with this one. And what I ended up doing was I split the levels into chunks of 5, where I would beat the first 5 levels, and then when I got to level 6, I'd say, okay, from now on, I can start from level 6. And then if I died somewhere between level 6 and 11, I would go back again and start from level 6. So I kind of made my own game out of it because the game is just so unfair and not giving you any continues in that sense. It might be one, to someday try and beat legit, but man, like I just could not believe that they didn't see that as a problem. And it probably, unfortunately, turns a lot of people away from the NES version of Arkanoid, because the third level, I think, is very iconic in Arkanoid. It's very tough. It's probably in any person's normal run where you're going to get your first game over. So just the fact that there's no continues still to this day blows my mind. And also something to note about the NES version, it has 3 additional levels that were not in the arcade version, taking the total up to 35, where the arcade version and even the Famicom Japanese version only had 32, so 3 new levels being added to the NES version is pretty cool. Arkanoid's fun. You're probably going to need a code to see the end of it, but still, I think it deserves a C. Arkista's Ring plays a lot like The Legend of Zelda, with the twist that you don't have a massive open overworld to explore, but rather it takes place in stages. So you have these like little mini kind of worlds to explore, where you find a key, open the door, and then it takes you to the next world. Do that 31 times, and that's it, except not really, because the game loops around and around and around, and so you actually have to beat 124 stages to technically reach the end, but it's unfortunately just playing the same game 4 times. But it's fun enough that I actually did it, and and once you get significantly powered up, it's not too difficult of a game to play. But I like the Legend of Zelda style gameplay. I always like to see that, and then the way that they handle it is just kind of bizarre. I think this game would have been a lot better had it had more of an overworld to just kind of play at your own pace than this whole kind of broken up level thing. But for what it does well enough. I think people have even looked inside the game, and it looked like at one point there maybe were more RPG elements planned, like NPCs and such like that to interact with. But as it is now, you do actually visit like towns and such, but there's nothing to do there. You can't go inside buildings, you can't talk to anyone. It's just a stage like any of the other ones. But it's fun. I think it's worth checking out. It's worth experiencing on your own. You probably don't want to have to do like the whole 4 playthroughs, but just doing one playthrough, beating like the 31, 32 stages that it has, I think is pretty cool. So Arkista's Ring gets a C. All right, 4 more to go. Let's see if my voice will hold up. I hope you're enjoying this. I'm having a lot of fun. The C stack's getting a little bit tall here, but I predicted that would probably happen. Astyanax. Very cool game. It plays a lot like Legendary Axe, which maybe you're more familiar with, maybe you're not, where you're this guy who has an axe and he's going at it, destroying everyone. Basically, it's this guy who's like having dreams. This girl's calling him for help from another world, and then eventually he gets transported to that world. And you play through all these levels, slicing stuff down. It's a good game. I'm typically a fan of games with a smaller sprite on the screen. I feel like when your sprite's bigger, it just makes you kind of like a meat shield. Everything hits you so easily, but Astyanax is still a fun one. Definitely recommend checking it out. Great music, very good gameplay, and it even has like those cinematic cutscenes in between levels, kind of Ninja Gaiden style, so it's very good for its time. And it's actually made by Jaleco, who I usually associate with games that aren't that great, but Astyanax is certainly one that they got right, and for that reason, it gets a nice B from me. Athena. I knew I was going to have a lot to say about this one, and for that reason, I specifically made a review of just this game last week. So if you want to hear more about Athena, I have done a 40-minute review. That's how much there is to say about this game. So definitely check that out. I don't think you'll regret it, but oh, what a weird game. It's wrong on so many levels, and yet you just don't want to look away because you're fascinating just what hilarious, crazy, weird things it's going to do next. And for that reason, I still look back and think, you know, I'm happy I played it. I actually had some fun with it, as jank and weird as it was at times. So it kind of borderlines on D, but I think it's worth checking out, even just to see how bizarre it is. So it gets a C in my book, but definitely check out the review if you want to hear some crazy, crazy stories of playing this crazy, crazy game. Athletic World, the first Power Pad game we're reaching today. It's basically just a guy running, and there's a few different environments that he runs through, like a swamp, through like a kind of ruins thing, and just like a normal track where groundhogs are popping up. Very fun, and it actually is a good workout. Like if you really set up the Power Pad, get into the mindset, and you go at it, you will burn some calories playing this game. And it's what it is. It's a Power Pad game. Not really fair to compare it to all the other ones, considering it's kind of almost in a league in its own. But if you have the Power Pad, Athletic World's a great one. And yeah, you could probably even like form a whole exercise routine around it, which is pretty neat. So I say check it out if you got it. It gets a B. The final game just before my kind of voice cuts out here is Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, apparently based on a cartoon which was out at the time. There's not much going on in this game. This game is kind of very bland. Like, it looks okay, it plays okay, but there's nothing that's gonna wow you or blow you away. The thing that always I remember about playing this game is in the third level. It's like a factory. I had no idea what to do. There's this guy running around at the bottom. I didn't know if he was like a boss I had to defeat. I explored the whole room and was just completely puzzled. It turns out you have to jump on this part of a machine that it doesn't even look like is sticking out far enough for you to actually jump on top of it. There's a whole perspective thing going on there that just kind of really confused me. And once I figured that out, the rest of the game was no issue. But yeah, the most difficult thing for me in this game was understanding the perspective of background objects versus foreground objects. And once I figured that out, it wasn't too hard. But yeah, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, very so-so. Not horrible, but not great either. So it gets a C. And yeah, a lot of C games, and that's gonna happen, right? Because the reality is most games are average. Most games aren't great, most games aren't awful, most games are very down the middle. So I kind of predicted that there would be a lot of C's. But a lot of B's and A's too, and a few D's and E's. So not too many games that you should just hold your nose and avoid should you ever see them. Hopefully, you'll take the time to check out some of these games, especially the B's and the A's, and of course, the S. But I hope you enjoyed that today. Thank you so much for checking this out. That is all 35 NES games that start with the letter A, and I guess next month we'll be taking on the B's, which is like double. It's like over 60 games. I have no idea how I'm going to do it. Maybe I should split it up into 2 parts. I was hoping I could do like a minute per game kind of thing, but of course, there's some that you need to talk about a little longer than that. So we'll see, but please let me know down in the comments below what you think of how I rated each of these games, and also what you think about the format, and what you think we should do for next month. When we're doing like twice as many games. Would you like to see that video split into 2? Do you like a massive long marathon video? Let me know. But otherwise, thanks again. Hope you enjoyed, and hope to see you next time for something different. So thanks, and see you later. I'm being covered up by C-grade games. Help!